Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Institute of Managers and Leaders Development Day. It is wonderful to have you all online for what are going to be 3 engaging sessions exploring the topic of building mentally healthy workplaces. My name is Ashley Renison, and I am Membership Manager at IML. It's my pleasure to be your host for Session 1 of Development Day, Unlocking Resilience, Practical Strategies for Thriving in the Workplace with Kim Tay. Can I firstly start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all meeting today, and also paying my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. For those of you who don't know, the Institute of Managers and Leaders is the peak body for management and leadership and the largest member community of managers and leaders across Australia and New Zealand. This Development Day, our 3rd for the year, is just part of a great suite of learning and development resources that we have available to organisations. These include short courses, webinars, events, and a range of signature and leadership development programs. It is fantastic to have you all online for today's event, which is focusing on a critical topic that has a big impact, not only in the workplace, but far beyond. The rate of complexity and change in the workplace has continued to create an ideal environment for mental health issues to flourish. When you consider that we spend as much as 1/3 of our lives at work, the impact of work on our quality of life is incredibly interconnected. With absenteeism due to mental health surpassing that from physical injury, individuals and organisations are starting to sit up and listen. The focus has now shifted to the growing issue of presenteeism, with the hybrid workplace making it more difficult to truly understand connection, engagement, and well-being. During our final Development Day for the year, we will tackle the concept of mentally healthy workplaces from 3 different perspectives and the impact to individuals and to managers and leaders. For individuals, we'll be looking at the need to proactively develop resilience, better understand and manage change, and and to balance work and life more effectively, something that is often easier said than done. For managers and leaders, we'll be discussing the importance of developing a workplace that is not only productive and efficient, but one where both physical and mental health and safety is paramount, and employees feel encouraged and included. So let's get down to business. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker for the day, Kim Tay, who is going to be discussing all things resilience with us this morning. Kim is the director at Wellbeing Works. With a background in qualitative research, Kim discovered the emerging field of positive psychology in 2005. She immediately saw its extraordinary potential to transform workplaces. Since then, she has been on a mission to share evidence-based tools and techniques from the fastest growing field in psychology with businesses and organisations everywhere. As the former director of online training at the New Zealand Institute of Wellbeing and Resilience, Kim has delivered hundreds of workshops nationally and globally. She is committed to keeping up with the latest research and best practices in the science of workplace wellbeing. Just before we get started today, just a couple of housekeeping items. We will hopefully have time for some questions at the end of the session. So if you think of any while Kim is speaking, please just pop them into either the chat or the Q&A box, and we will get to as many as possible at the end. We also have an action plan and resource page that you should have hopefully received. So please feel free to have that with you if you should have received that yesterday with your reminder email. And you can answer some of the questions that are on that as Kim's going through her session today. And we'll also share that in the chat shortly in case you don't have it with you. And we will also be launching a poll soon as well too, to get a feel of how you are going at the moment. And we'll be sharing the results of that throughout the session. That is all from me. Kim, over to you. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks for the intro, Ash. No hinga poa me horana o kutipuna. Ko te poho o tamatea te maunga, ko o takaro te awa no ototahi o ho. Ko Kim Tay toka ingoa. Ngā mihi kia koutou. Welcome, everyone. So I'm originally hail from Christchurch in New Zealand. I'm now very much a Jaffa, what New Zealanders call a Jaffa, which stands for just another friendly Aucklander. And my parents came from Singapore and the Netherlands. And I'm very privileged to work with an amazing and talented bunch of experts across a range of different fields. And our mission at the Wellbeing Works is to take the science of wellbeing and bring it to life with really practical and easy to use tools and strategies. My own interest in the science of human performance began at a precociously young age, about the age of 12, I bought a biorhythm calculator to learn when I was supposedly going to be at the peak of my powers. I did study psychology at university and was delighted many years later to come across what was then the emerging field of positive psychology. Now, most of psychology up until that time had been focused on getting people from kind of -5 up to 0, so-called functioning normally. Positive psychology is about how people can get from 0 up to +5, how you can thrive under pressure and in any circumstances and really enjoy life. So I'll be sharing research that comes from both psychology and neuroscience. And when it comes to resilience, it's really helpful to have a definition. And if you think resilience is about bouncing back from adversity, I think you'll be with the vast majority of people. It's definitely true. But resilience has another really interesting dimension to it. It's a little bit more about how we navigate or steer through the adversity or challenge or stress that we face, so that we can kind of grow and thrive from those experiences. So we can all relate to a very common challenge that we've been through globally, right? Yes, I'm talking about COVID. But did we bounce back to our former selves? Have we gone back to who we were in 2019? Not quite. We've managed to steer our way through the challenges, and we've come out with, on the other side, having learnt a few more skills. You know, we've been able to successfully homeschool kids. We've been able to run really great Zoom meetings. Remember the lawyer who couldn't quite get rid of that cat filter? We've been able to stick really long things up our noses and not hurt our brains. So how we are able to get through adversity is kind of what counts. Resilience helps us to navigate the really big life challenges, as well as really everyday adversities like not being able to find a car park or Zoom wanting to update just before a meeting. But the other side of resilience is really interesting. Resilience helps us to be able to extend ourselves, to take on challenge, to stretch, grow, achieve all we are capable of. And this is the aspect of resilience that really excites me. It's like, how can we do more? How can we have a greater impact on the world? I'll be sharing 3 strategies with you today that can help with both getting through the big and small challenges in life, but also that can give us that kind of mental strength and capacity to take on more challenge. One of the most fundamental aspects to building our resilience and well-being is not surprisingly to do with this large, complex, and sometimes tricky little organ, the brain. So while well-being seems to be cooler than a Kardashian Instagram post right now, it's really popular, there is a vast amount of scientific research that gives us an understanding of how it is that humans can not just cope with stress and pressure, but we can flourish and even thrive under pressure. But when it comes to the brain, even though we've been able to manage to evolve to, you know, be able to do things like scroll through social media at the same time as following the plot line of the last episode of Last Stop Larimar on Netflix, we do actually have a bit of an evolutionary hangover. So if we cast our minds back to our really early ancestors, let's imagine Zog. He got up one morning, felt a bit peckish, and he popped his head out of his cave to do a spot of hunting. And in the corner of his eye, he saw a shadow. Now let's imagine Zog ignored that shadow. Zog hungry. He was fixating on some kind of deliciousness for breakfast. So off he went. And that shadow turned out to be, yes, the legendary saber-toothed tiger. Well, we know what would have happened, right? It would have been curtains for Zog, and we would not have evolved to be the highly sophisticated, digitally adept species that we are today. The problem is this evolutionary hangover just got nothing to do with how much wine you drank last night. It still goes off in our brains like that annoyingly sensitive smoke alarm that screams at you when someone's just burnt the toast. This fight, flight, or flee response to something that's not actually going to kill us is called the negativity bias. And what happens is this: our brains react in the same way that Zog's did when he did pay attention to that saber-toothed tiger. Whether it's an email from Andrew in accounts saying the grumpy client hasn't paid, or the printer jamming just as you're racing out the door, or a computer says no moment. A cascade of stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, they flood our brain. Now, as you'll recognize, these types of perceived threats don't usually warrant the fight, flight, or freeze response. Punching that grumpy client might be a fun little fantasy, but typically not that helpful. Neither is running away from Andrew in accounts or hiding under the desk, hoping no one can see you when you've got that budget forecast due. Our brains also fixate on that threat, honing in on it like a laser beam. And I'm sure you can all relate to that time when you got some feedback and it was all la, 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 all these positive things like this. Yet what's the one thing we remember? The one thing we obsess over? The one thing we turn over and over in our brain as we toss sleepless in our beds at night? Is it, you did really well pulling the figures together on a tight deadline? No, it's that one negative comment. And often it's easy to fall into the trap of obsessing or dwelling on the things that we can't control. And that's where we need to learn to use some tools to counter this negativity bias to help our resilience. And one that's proven to be really effective is the CAN technique. And I'll demonstrate how this works with a story about my dad. I went to visit him recently, and he told me he'd been feeling a bit depressed. My mother had died a few years earlier, so alarm bells went off. And I asked him, what's been going on? And he told me he'd been losing a lot of his tennis games. Phew. Instant relief for me. The thing is, though, that tennis is his life. He still plays 3 times a week at the age of 91. And when he's not playing tennis, he's watching it. He's got shoe boxes full of DVDs and VHS tapes even of all the big games, including the enthralling McEnroe versus Borg Wimbledon final of 1980. So later on that day, Dad and I went to have a hit of tennis, and he asked me to video him serving. And while we were playing, I realized that he'd done automatically this CAN technique. It's what optimists do. He is, in fact, the most optimistic person in my family, and I know this because I have tested them all. Here's how it works. So what he'd done was he'd gone, what are the things that I can control? That's the C in the CAN technique. So in this case, Dad could control the accuracy of his serve, the speed of his serve, and how often he practices. The A stands for accept. What are the things that I just have to accept and let go, no matter how crappy they are? And no matter how much my brain keeps wanting to go there and dwell on them. So Dad has to accept the fact that he is indeed an old fart. In fact, we've been calling him this since we were teenagers, my brother and I. The old man is literally his name. Doesn't cause him too much distress. He's had quite a long time to get used to it. But the undeniable advancement of age doesn't exactly make him pump his fists like a Leighton Hewitt when he gets up in the morning. Come on, yeah, I'm 91. No, he has to accept the fact that he is old, he's short as well, and he can't control his reach. He plays against men who are in their 70s, who are 6 foot tall with the wingspan of an albatross. So those are the things he just had to accept and let go. And now, what could he do? So this is what the N stands for. He got me to video him serving so he could make corrections. And he discovered a new kind of ball toss. Plus, he found that the club has a ball machine so he could play to his heart's content without losing. Our brain's habit of dwelling on things that are not going well really saps our energy and is a big fat time waster. So the CAN technique is literally a game changer. It can become a bias towards action. So rather than getting stuck on the things that you can't control, you list the things that you can control about a situation. Where you've got just a little bit of leverage or a bit of wiggle room, you list the things that you can accept and let go, and then you make a list of what you can do now to take action. And you will have heard elite athletes say things like control the controllables in media interviews after losing a game. It's a really useful phrase to remind ourselves to focus on the controllables. And we know that our mindset is a really integral part of our performance. Athletes have been working on their mental fitness for years, and you can tell who's better at it. Here's a quote from a famous tennis player. Any idea who it is? There's no shortage of candidates. I was really surprised to find that this was Roger Federer. He wasn't always the unflappable, cool, calm, collected Swiss player that we've seen winning tough points and tough matches over and over again. And yes, all those moments are captured on DVDs in the old man's shoeboxes. Federer used to be all over the place with his emotions. The wake-up call for him was the death of his coach, Peter Carter. He'd coached him from the age from when Federer was 9 until he was 18. And Carter died in a car crash about a week before Federer's 21st birthday. And this loss was a real turning point in his life. It spurred his motivation to really focus and train harder, including working on his mindset. And he says it took him about 3 years to work on his mental strength. So it's a work in progress for all of us, but I'll share with you a simple technique for taming our emotional brain. Small disclaimer, it's not guaranteed to get you to the finals of Wimbledon. Might help you play tennis till you're 91 though. So I'm going to show you some words in a moment, but first of all, what I want you to do is put X into the chat, but don't hit enter. We're going to do what's called the emotional Stroop test. So I'm going to have a look in a moment, and I will show you some words. And when I show the words, I'd like you to read out the colors of the words, okay? Not the words themselves, but the colors of the words. And when you've read them out, hit enter. So you'll have X in the chat and you'll hit enter when you've finished reading the colors of the words. I'm going to do the timer, and here you go. Oh, that was really fast. Look at that. Okay, really just a couple of seconds for some of you. Well done. Okay, so now let's try a different set of words. Oh, you've all done it so quickly. I didn't even get my timer going. Typically, when you read out the colors of these words, we all take a little bit longer. Why do you think that is? The first words were neutral. The second words are negative. So the brain finds it harder. The negative words are attracting our attention and therefore delaying the processing of other stimulus information, making it harder for us to say the colors rather than the actual words. So that's one of the pesky negativity bias little trip ups at play, again, slowing us down. Because what happens is our brains are hardwired to focus our attention narrowly on the source of our emotional distress, but it's really taxing. It takes up a lot of brain processing power. So being able to manage our emotions is one of the fundamental tools of resilience. So here's another tennis player who's renowned for not being able to manage his emotions. I'm sure you'll recognize this guy. It's John McEnroe in Wimbledon, 1981. He's already on one warning.
It was the wrong side. The ball chalk came up all over. No, it was a bit of a spread, Mr. McEnroe. That was a good call. Excuse me? That was a bit of a spread.
Look, you can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious! That ball was on the line. Chalk flew up. It was clearly in. How can you possibly call that out? How many you can miss? That he's walking over. Everyone knows it's in this whole stadium, and you call it out? Explain that to me, will you?
The linesman called a fault because the ball was on this side of the court.
The chalk came on, it doesn't matter.
No, the very fact that there is a spread of chalk, as you can see, Mr. McEnroe. Your second service.
So McEnroe goes on to double fault, not surprisingly, right? Because his brain's all fired up. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and just give you a little demonstration, and we can all do this together, which is about how we can understand how the brain works using our hands as a model. So if you put your thumb in the middle of your palm and then fold your fingers over the top, this is a model of our brain. Eyes are at the front, that's the back of our head. The top of the brain here is the cortex, that's represented by our forefingers. And the brain is connected to the rest of our body through the spinal cord, represented by our wrist. Underneath the cortex, you'll see the brain stem, that's represented by our palm. And this sends and receives messages from the brain to the body. And we've also got in here the limbic system, represented by our thumb. You can see this is connected to the cortex and to the brainstem. It's known as the emotional brain, and it's concerned with the question, is this good or bad? It motivates us to move towards the good and away from the bad. And the amygdala is within the limbic region. It's the shape and size of an almond, and it's responsible for carrying out the fight or flight response. This part, the cortex, is known as the thinking brain. And sometimes it can work just a little bit too well. So we end up thinking too much, dwelling about situations, focusing on things we can't control, even catastrophizing. And within the thinking brain is the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for keeping the cortex, the limbic area, the brainstem, and the body, the whole thing, all connected and harmonious. And when we become distressed, our emotional brain can override our thinking brain and we can flip our lid. And that's exactly what darling McEnroe was doing. And when we're emotionally overridden, we lose the ability to be tuned in, balanced, connected, and have the flexibility to deal with situations with reason. You may have heard of the term the amygdala hijack. It's like giving ourselves a prefrontal lobotomy, like chopping these bits off. We can't think straight. So this is why it's really helpful to have strategies that we can use to manage our emotions. So if we go back to the brain, the first thing we need to do is recognize that emotions are our brain's way of telling us its prediction. Our brains are constantly sizing up the world and trying to work out what's going on. The signals that our brain sends are literally just data points. That's what we need to think of them, that our emotions are just data that our brains are using to try and work out what we should do next. So here are 3 ways to manage emotions. Neuroscience studies by Matthew Lieberman at UCLA have shown the incredible power of labeling to help us control and dampen powerful emotions. When we put feelings into words, we get our thinky brain, the prefrontal cortex, on the case, and we put the brakes on our wet yourself in fear or punch people brain, the amygdala. So we've got to name it to tame it. And ironic as it might seem, saying the word anxiety reduces anxiety. The other way we need to label is giving ourselves a little bit of distance. So let's imagine someone's left the milk out on the bench and you've just poured some globby, congealed, sour-smelling stuff into that coffee you were really looking forward to. So you're angry. You can do the mental shift from being the emotion to being an observer of the emotion by adding in, I'm noticing, I'm feeling. So what we're doing here with the additional word of noticing is reminding ourselves that we are not the emotion. Remember, emotion is just data. It's not a directive. We don't have to act on it. We're just noticing that this is something we're feeling. We're not angry. We're noticing we're feeling anger. Imagine if the only diagnosis a doctor could give you was you're either sick or not sick. I found the problem. You are sick, yet not incredibly helpful, right? And it's exactly the same with emotions. When a doctor can give us a more accurate diagnosis, like, for example, you have contact dermatitis, we've got treatment options. When we can label our emotions with more specificity, or what's called granularity, that gives us some treatment options. Now, granularity, it's not some kind of special sugar that's going to instantly restore that awful coffee. It's about using a more fine-grained level of vocabulary to make a more accurate diagnosis about what we're feeling, so we have some options, some useful options about what we can do. So let's say, for example, you feel stressed. If you were to label that with more granularity, it could be anxiety about an uncertain future. It could be you're stressed, but you're actually feeling fear because you're assuming something bad's going to happen. Maybe it's pressure because you've got too much going on, too many responsibilities. Perhaps you're actually just stressed, but you're really feeling annoyed because no one told you the meeting was on Zoom, not Teams, and now you're late. How you'd respond to each of these would be different. You might seek more information, check your assumptions, look for ways to delegate or reprioritize, or have conversations with your manager, or just take a pause. Labeling with granularity helps us move through the emotion with greater ease and identify what it is that we need. The second strategy for managing emotions is to use what's called third-person self-talk. I'm going to play an audio clip of an actor who you'll recognize, talking about a movie she was struggling with, and she even trying to get her lawyer to get her out of the contract because she wanted to quit.
Every day I wanted to quit. Every day I had a pit in my stomach thinking, I'm going to be terrible. I'm going to have to get up on this stage in front of hundreds of people and I'm going to sound awful, or I'm not going to be able to do it. And, I tried every way. I called my lawyer. I was like, get me out of this. I told the director I can't do it anymore. But that first performance, the first time we did it, Joaquin and I were together we were in Memphis on this little stage. God, it was terrifying. There were 200 extras just staring at us. And I thought I was going to throw up. But I got out there and I was like, just do it, Reese. Just do it. And I did. And it all worked out.
And she won an Oscar. She was talking about Walk the Line. So self-talk is something that we all do at one time or another. But the problem is many of us are not particularly nice in the way we talk to ourselves because of the negativity bias. We tend to talk negatively to ourselves. Professor Ethan Kross calls it chatter. And harsh self-criticism, like I'm going to be terrible, I'm going to sound awful, I'm not going to be able to do it, it activates the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, and it elevates stress hormones. But when we refer to ourselves in the third person, we gain a little bit of psychological distance from our experiences, and it helps us to think about ourselves more like how we think about other people. So we're more likely to say something useful like, just do it. Even if we're saying something kind to ourselves, researchers have seen the evidence in the brain that people's distress decreases rapidly within 1 second when they performed self-talk in the third person, referring to you in the third person compared with the first person. So you could simply say, Gary, this feeling will pass if you're experiencing a tough emotion. But we can also use third person self-talk to pump ourselves up like Reese did. Gary, you've got this, when you're about to give a presentation. Or when we're trying to motivate ourselves to do something healthier, like we can say, Gary, go to bed. You'll be fresher and able to tackle this better in the morning. So that's one way that we can manage our emotions, is third person self-talk. The third way is really, really simple. It's just to move. Now, I know I said before that running away or hiding wasn't always the best strategy for dealing with a perceived threat, but when we move our bodies, we change the predictions our brains are trying to make. Changing your surroundings sends different messages to your brain. It could be going for a walk, moving into another room, or nipping outside for a quick fag. No, sorry. Okay, smoking, vaping, terribly, terribly bad. But maybe smokers were onto something. Taking a breath and getting outside. It's just that breath that they were taking was somewhat deadly. But you could nip outside for a quick breath of fresh air. really super simple ways to change how your brain is processing information and manage tough emotions that sap our energy, focus, and attention. So we've talked about difficult emotions, more of the negative kind. My next tool to share with you is to focus on the other kind of emotions. There are 10 emotions that are particularly useful in boosting well-being and resilience, and we're going to share the results of the poll that you've been answering with you now, so we can see which of these 10 you've been experiencing over the past week. So we can see which are the most common ones. Well, we've got gratitude, so hopefully many of you have already understood the power of that particular emotion. It's hugely beneficial for us and for our brains. Got quite a bit of interest there, and also quite high up is joy. So isn't that lovely? Don't you all feel this little bit of warmth and a bit glowy now? We can see that. And love, also quite high up on there as well. Serenity, not surprisingly, that's just a little bit low. And awe. Now, awe is that emotion that you experience when you see something that you just marvel at and go, wow, that's amazing. We usually see it, you can see I'm looking up at the sky. We usually notice and experience awe when we are in nature. But you can also notice it when you, I don't know, maybe see just a tiny little ant walking along, carrying something that's like 100,000 times its weight. So positive emotions, as you can see here, they're not just about being happy or laughing, you know, that high energy. You can see there's also ones there that have lower energy, like feeling a sense of inspiration or interest. So why is it that we would want to activate these positive emotions? Well, let's go back to the brain. Positive emotions do the opposite of negative emotions, which narrow our attention. Positive emotions give us the ability to have a wider range of thoughts and ideas. We're more creative, we're more adaptable, we're healthier, we even live longer when we experience more positive emotion. And we have broader, literally broader peripheral vision. So if you're, going to have to teach someone how to learn to drive, it pays to be in a really good state of mind, very positive, maybe make a few jokes before you get behind the wheel. Positive emotions also have this amazing impact on our physical health. And one of the most fascinating studies in the field of wellbeing science was done by Dr. Sheldon Cohen. Nobody really knows how he managed to get this past the ethics committee, but he got a group of volunteers and he took a range of measurements, including age, weight, blood pressure, heart rate, cortisol levels, affect, you name it, he measured it. He then infected them with the rhinovirus. He did this by squirting it up their noses. And then they were kept in quarantine to see how their symptoms developed. Now, of course, we've all heard of man flu, right? So he couldn't just rely on self-reporting. I'm really dying here. He had to take objective measurements. And this is where the slightly gross experiment gets decidedly more gross. He squirted a dye up their noses to see how long it would take to get to the back of their throat to measure congestion. And he weighed their snotty tissues to measure mucus production. So kind of gross, but fascinating results. What did he find? The one thing that made the difference between people who got sick and how sick they got was their level of positive affect or mood, their positive emotional style. And the research results were very conclusive, and hopefully the study won't ever have to be done again. Positive emotions also enhance our health by helping us to cope with stress. They actually undo the physical effects of stress. So if we test this out, we will be able to see how well this works. In a moment, I'm going to choose someone at random from the webinar to make a 3-minute speech. We'll switch over to you. And we'll ask you to summarize what resilience is and how to build it and how it impacts our brain. And then obviously this is being recorded, so we'll post it on YouTube and it will be shown to millions of people. So we're about to pick someone at random from the audience. Are you ready? Now, of course, I'm not going to do this, but hopefully your heart rate kind of got a little bit elevated. It's very similar to a research experiment that Dr. Barbara Fredrickson did. She gave similar instructions to people, and sure enough, their heart rates went up, their blood pressure went up, went through the roof. But when they found out about a minute later that they would not actually have to go through on this panic-inducing task, the volunteers who had higher levels of positive emotion recovered twice as fast from the shock as the others. Their cardiovascular system snapped back to the baseline, while the people who were more in a negative state of mind, their palms were still kind of sweaty. In another study, positive emotions have been shown to help with productivity and creativity. In a study, doctors who were given a dose of positive emotion were then able to make a complex liver diagnosis 20% faster and more accurately than the doctors who were not primed with positive emotion. So I don't know, maybe the next time you're about to go under the knife, perhaps have a few jokes at hand, or at least a smile for the anaesthetist. One of the ways that this works is that when we experience positive emotion, we get a burst of dopamine, and it literally refuels our brain. The prefrontal cortex, this bit here that we rely on when it comes to the heavy lifting around thinking, solving problems, coming up with ideas and all that good stuff, it runs out of fuel quite easily. So this dopamine hit helps to keep the brain working hard. Think of it like a shot of espresso for your brain, but without the jitters. It's also a much more sustainable and healthy way to get dopamine compared to alcohol, drugs, I don't know, scrolling through social media. So we need these espresso shots of dopamine often because, unfortunately, bad is heavier than good. Roy Baumeister's research found that negative emotions and experiences really stick to the brain. They weigh us down more. Why is that? Well, if we think back to our friend Zog, right? He's got out of his cave, the saber-toothed tiger didn't get him, and he's out hunting, spending hours and hours and hours exhaustedly chasing down his breakfast. And it got away. That loss led to a far more emotionally intense experience than if he'd managed to catch his breakfast. This powerful emotional experience of loss was designed to motivate him to get up again the next day and hunt down that prey again so he'd survive. And this legacy remains with us. The despair we feel at losing $100 is in no way matched by the satisfaction or joy at gaining or winning $100. So if we know positive emotions are such great performance enhancers, how do we get more of them? So I'm going to share with you 3 ways. We can schedule, we can savor, and we can celebrate small wins. Scheduling. Because positive emotions are so subtle and fleeting, we need to be deliberate about making sure we experience them. I invite you to put into the chat one of these positive emotions that you can plan to make sure you experience this week. So put in the emotion, but also write in how will you experience it, where, when, and who with. We have to almost put ourselves in the way of positive emotions to make sure we experience them. These are great, fantastic examples. So we've got playing with the puppy, gaming with my wife on Friday, taking a walk in nature on Thursday for serenity, watching the kids play sport on the weekend, feeling pride, amusement, board gaming with friends this week, fantastic. Or sitting on the deck with my hubby, looking at the chats going so fast I can't even read them all. Fantastic. So make a calendar appointment for yourself to make sure that you experience one of these emotions every week. It doesn't take long, but the more you do it, the more you'll notice them and the more you'll experience them and the more you'll elevate your ability to cope with stress, but also be healthier. When you do have those opportunities to go on your trip to Byron or experience gratitude at home over dinner, the second way you can get more out of them is to savor. Be really present in the moment and juice that little emotion for all you can. Because remember, they're really subtle. Our brain's going, yeah, whatever, another good thing's going to happen. Watch out for something that's going wrong. Right, so we have to reverse that by going, I've got a little bit of awe, I've got a bit of joy, and really dwell on it and pause to let that emotion sink in for 10 to 20 seconds. Making a habit of dwelling on good things can really rewire your brain. So immerse yourself in that moment of joy or that inspiration, or when you're feeling that sense of awe looking up at the sky. Marvel in the wonder. Allow yourself to be fully absorbed in the pleasure. And look, it could just be as simple as getting into clean sheets at night, you know, luxuriate in the feeling, or smelling your first coffee of the day. Allow the aroma to take over your senses for a moment. We often dismiss good things. So remember, the brain is just wanting you to kind of dismiss them quickly and look out for what else is going wrong. So don't be your own killjoy. Stop and pause and take it in. We can also savor the past by reminiscing about good times. So talk about them. Put together a photo album. Look at the pictures on your wall. Write about them. And we can savor in the future by looking forward to what good things are going to be happening. So put into the chat, what's something that you're looking forward to? When we can dig into the anticipation and remind ourselves about what's coming up, whether it's a board games night, a trip to the beach, a big walk you're planning, or just going to check out the new ice cream place. This is how you can get more bang for your buck out of holidays and good times. So let's see, what are the things that people have got to look forward to? And feel free to put in an emotion that you think you are going to experience at the time, or even just looking forward to it at the moment. So we've got lots of trips going in the chat, but what about something that's just an event that's not going away? So there we go. Graduation, pride, perfect example. Going to your favorite coffee shop. Yoga tomorrow night, serenity, fantastic. So lots of really great examples. So remember what's coming up and make sure you anticipate and really look forward to it and start planning and thinking about it. And if it's something coming up in a little bit of time, then you've got lots of time to remind each other about what you're doing. Axe throwing Christmas party, Glenn. Well, I think that's going to be one of the most exciting events that we can see in the chat there. So thanks everybody for sharing that. And then the last way that we can get more bang for our buck out of positive emotions is to allow ourselves to celebrate small wins, to be proud, to self-congratulate when you've done something good, to give yourself a little internal high five when you, I don't know, just managed to get the kids out the door in the morning, or helped a difficult client, or had a breakthrough with a problem you've been solving. I'm not saying you have to get out there and be, you know, gloat and be boasty, make boasty pants. Just give yourself a little credit where credit's due. Self-congratulation extends the pleasure we take in accomplishments. If you've done something you're proud of, let yourself bask in that for a moment. You might think about the effort you've put in, or how much you've kind of been waiting for this to happen. You could do a little fist pump or a little victory dance. And you can do this for yourself. You can also do this with your team. You can do this with your clients. You can call out other people's small wins or big wins and successes. Looking out for what others are doing well and celebrating is a great way to build a really strong, resilient team culture. So let's practice this one too. Put into the chat one small or big win, one thing that you can acknowledge over the past week, month, or even this year. One little win, one big win. If you can do this at the end of the day, what's one thing you managed to get done this day? We all have this endless kind of list that never gets finished, right? Our to-do lists don't get finished. But if you can end the day by looking at what you've done and just jotting down one little achievement, it puts a lovely bookmark to the end of the day and gives you a little bit more energy for the next day. So we've got people who have submitted papers, got up to the gym, tidied their office, sold their ugly yellow car, met a deadline, finished a 4-wheel drive storage system. Maybe that's 4WD, probably something a little bit more technical that me with a terrible storage system doesn't have. Planted a summer veggie garden. Fantastic. So lots of lovely achievements there. So remember, it's so important to acknowledge achievements. Well done, everybody. So let's sum up. What have we learned so far? In a nutshell, we have learned to ignore our inner zog, to kick that evolutionary hangover down the road, and stop dwelling on the things that we can't control by focusing on the things that we can, to take action. And we've learned that managing our emotions is really, really helpful, that it leads to better performance and energy, and that if we can name our emotions, we can tame them. And that if we can talk to ourselves in the third person, that's going to be a hell of a lot more helpful than beating ourselves up with negative self-talk. And that we can simply change our environment to change the way our brain is perceiving what's going on, to send us some different data signals, so we don't have to own or get stuck in an unhelpful emotion. And we've learned that activating positive emotions are real performance enhancers for our brains and our bodies. But because they're so subtle, we need to schedule them in, we need to savor them when we do experience them, and we need to celebrate small wins. Small things done daily or regularly really makes a huge difference to whether we're flourishing or languishing, and how well our brains function and how well we manage to build our resilience, regardless of what is happening in the world around us. So thanks, everybody. We do have time for some questions. And I've been very busy making you put other things into the chat, so you probably haven't had time to post any questions, but Ash might have seen some in the Q&A, or you might have some of your own, Ash.
Yeah, I'll just give everyone a second to get their thoughts together. But Kim, thank you so much. That was a really fantastic presentation. Some really practical strategies there, I think, that we can all take into our everyday life and to our work as well too. So really appreciate you sharing those. I particularly liked the CAN technique and the idea of scheduling and prioritizing experiencing positive emotions. It's not something I've really thought about before, but it was fantastic. And I particularly enjoyed seeing everyone's responses to you setting our little fake task about presenting on resilience. You probably didn't see this, Kim, but we had a couple of comments, I think, that we might have fallen into either of these categories. So Chanel said that she had started prepping to...
I did see that. Go Chanel. Good preparation.
And Maria said she had considered leaving, and we had a few people that shared that sentiment as well. So it was, I think all of us probably fell into either of those categories. So thank you so much. We do have a question that's come through from Bree. How do you implement strategies like this into your team if you have staff members who are struggling with resilience?
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay. So one of the things you can do is lead by example. Emotions are really contagious. So if somebody's feeling really stressed, then it's really good for you to model being calm and to help calm them down by giving them a bit of space to kind of talk about what they're, what's going on with them, and asking them how they're feeling and getting them to be really specific and label that emotion. And then you can dig in and ask her, so what help is it that you need? So really getting them to be able to switch from feeling whatever negative emotion they're feeling to starting to look for some kind of solution. And I also saw a question that went into the chat really early on about how I managed to kind of something to do about positivity. There's been so much in the chat, I've kind of lost it. But there are lots of quick things that you can do to manage your kind of emotions and to boost those positive emotions. And the personal one here, it is Penny asked, what do you personally do daily to keep you positive? So actually lots of things. When it comes to positive emotions, I play music. Particularly, it's my quick go-to when I'm feeling a bit like lacking in energy or honesty, when it's at the end of the day and I was like, oh God, now I've got to cook dinner. I just put on some really great loud music, right? It's really quick, super simple. I also meditate. That's a whole other topic. And I've noticed I've stopped my meditation practice recently, and I've really noticed my energy levels and my positivity has not been as high as normal.
Thank you, Kim. Some really great ideas there. We have a question from Alexander. In fostering a mentally healthy workplace, how do you recommend organisations balance the need for open communication about mental health challenges with the importance of respecting individuals' privacy and creating a supportive, non-intrusive environment? Okay, so when you're asking people how they are, maybe ask them to share how they're feeling, but you have to make sure that you create a really safe space. So you have to already have built trust and rapport with people. And to make sure that you kind of don't intrude, honestly, people will only tell you what they want you to know. People are unlikely to
if they don't feel comfortable kind of going beyond whatever boundary they've set for themselves, that they're literally not going to tell you kind of too much. So I don't think you have to worry too much. It's more about making sure that you create a safe space, that you're non-judgmental, that you're encouraging and affirming, and don't feel like you have to have the answers. People in the workplace now, like, yes, we want people to be more open about how they're feeling, but don't feel like you have to solve everybody's problems. Simply by enabling people to feel like they can share, and you are able to listen non-judgmentally and exhibit some sense of caring, that you care about them as a person, that is a really, really important and great kind of first step.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kim. And we'll be diving a little bit further into that in our coming 2 sessions as well, too. So we'll absolutely be exploring that a little bit more. We have a question that's come through from Catherine. Are there any indicators that can be helpful when trying to identify negative emotions? Sometimes it can be hard to define which one it is.
There is an amazing new app that's just been made free, and I'm just going to try and show it to you on my phone. It's called How We Feel, and it's free on Android and iPhones. How We Feel. And what it does is it gives you the opportunity to have a check-in. And in it, it comes from the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And it's got these 4 different categories of emotions. Oh, there you go. Roberta's already using it. So you could say how you're feeling, and it gives you a whole list of emotions. So the yellow zone is kind of high energy positive, which is how I'm feeling right now. And it also has negative emotions and the high energy and low energy in the blue. So that's a great app to get you used to identifying with more granularity how you're feeling, but it goes beyond that and actually gives you some really simple strategies to manage your emotions. So I highly recommend How We Feel. That's what it's called.
Excellent. Thank you. I will be downloading that myself. It sounds great. A question from Roberta. How do you test optimism, Kim? You said you did this with your members.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a free test. If you go to, and you can just Google it, Authentic Happiness. It's a website developed by the University of Pennsylvania, and one of the kind of fathers of positive psychology, Professor Martin Seligman. And he's developed the optimism test. So if you go to the Authentic Happiness website, and you will find there's a test center, and in the top kind of half dozen or so, you'll see the optimism test. And that's how you can measure your level of optimism. Really useful on that one.
Love it. Thank you, Kim. And probably our final question from Uma. How can we get rid of negative emotions, which can sometimes start as soon as we get up in the morning? Big question.
Okay, so one technique is to do some breathing, because remember, this is the limbic brain, right? And when it's perceiving some kind of threat, it's activating. And how we can get back into our prefrontal cortex is by sending messages to the brain that the threat response doesn't need to be there. It can just calm down. So one of the ways that we can do some breathing is to do what's called 5-finger breathing, where you just breathe in as you run your finger up one side, breathe out as you go down the other. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. So what that does is it gets you to breathe in a regular, even pattern that sends signals from the heart to the brain that the threat response doesn't need to be there. Everything's okay in my world, Kim, stand down. You're also activating oxytocin. Oxytocin is a neurotransmitter that helps us to feel calm, and it's activated by touch. It's also activated by reaching out and for help, support, or supporting other people, talking to others, hugging your dog or cat. So oxytocin, you want to kind of get those neurotransmitters working in your brain. Exercise, also hugely helpful. It doesn't have to involve Lycra. You could simply run around the house, run up and down the stairs. And what that does is it helps to kind of get rid of some of the kind of stress that you might have built up in your body, helps to elevate your heart rate, and particularly regular exercise is a really good strategy for emotion regulation, for feeling better. It activates, like one workout can actually give you a whole host of other neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. So really simple, basic ways to kind of help yourself feel better. And of course, I will go back to meditation, even if it's just for 1 minute. So I know we're probably running out of time, but there's, lots of, and that Anne's done quite a lot of things in the chat in there as well. Putting on some great music that you love, anything that you can do that you enjoy will help you to feel more positive.
There are some great strategies there, Kim. I felt myself getting calmer just watching you do the breathing exercise. And I think a few people in the comments said the same thing. So no, really, really fantastic practical strategies that you've been sharing with us all throughout this session. Thank you so much to you, Kim, for taking the time to be part of today's event. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us today. And I know that the audience has been sending through lots of comments echoing that sentiment as well too. Thank you so much to everyone who's joined us as well too. I appreciate you all being so open with your feelings at the moment and what you're doing to experience joy and positive emotions as well too. So thank you so much to everyone who's joined us today. For those of you joining us for the next session, we'll be back online in half an hour with Shannon Cooper, and we'll be exploring how to build psychological safety through team engagement. For those of you leaving us for the day, thank you so much for your attendance. Please keep an eye out for the resource email. We'll make sure that we include the link to the action plan. Don't worry, you haven't missed anything if you couldn't access that link. It's just got some great activities that you can complete after the session with yourself and with your team, looking at the CAN technique and some of the other great strategies that Kim's spoken about today. And we'll also have a recording of today's session for anyone who would like to come back and watch it again, and for those who joined us late. Please also take some time to review what's on offer at the Institute, including our extremely popular leadership program, short courses and events. We'd also love to have you all at our end of year celebrations that are happening at the moment, so that you can connect with more of our members. Thank you so much again to Kim, everyone for joining us. Hope you have a great day, and we'll hopefully see you for session 2 shortly. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.